In this video, we're going to talk about quantitative research designs, and we're going to look at a few examples of how these designs have been applied in the literature. Now, when you read a research report, you should note that it's a good practice to identify the methods used in a study in the abstract and potentially in the title, because this helps the reader find relevant studies when they're performing a literature review. As you read the methodology section, you may notice that different words may be used to present the research design. So you may see research design, study design, methodology. It's all basically the same. And ideally, in a well-written report, we would find that the researcher includes justification for the choice of research design that they are employing in the present study, and they may review works from the past that have applied this design to similar situations, if not the same research problem. If the design is not explicitly named, then look out for clues throughout the methods section, especially the sampling description and also the description of the procedures. The very broadest way of categorizing research designs in quantitative work are experimental and non-experimental research design families. And experimental research typically aims to test the effect of some intervention by manipulating the conditions that participants experience during the course of the study, whereas non-experimental research is more descriptive and does not try to actively change the conditions that the participants experience. In experimental research, the researcher is usually trying to determine whether an independent treatment variable caused an effect in a dependent variable. And these are typically carefully controlled studies, which means that they try to account for any possible confounding variables that might offer an alternative explanation for any measured effect on the outcome variable. Non-experimental quantitative research, on the other hand, is quite descriptive. They may be describing how variables are related to each other or trying to describe trends in a large population. You may also see research designs referred to as descriptive or observational, and these are non-experimental designs. In general, they are not trying to make strong claims about cause and effect relationships. Instead, they try to make strong claims that the trends or patterns that they observe would generalize to the population of interest. So we're going to look at 5 common quantitative research designs: true experimental designs, quasi-experimental designs, single subject designs, correlational designs, and survey research designs. This table shows you how you can analyze the description of a method and try to determine what sort of research design was being employed. You can look at whether or not the researcher manipulated the conditions that the participants experienced. You can look at whether they looked at one or more groups. You can look at the types of questions that they were asking. Did they aim to describe a trend? Did they intend to measure relationships among variables? Or did they intend to compare groups? Especially for relatively poorly written quantitative research reports, you may find that this sort of table can really help you to dissect what is reported and take a good guess at what the most likely research design actually was. Now let's look at a true experiment. Now, a key characteristic of the true experiment is that random assignment is used to place participants into treatment and control groups. And sometimes there are multiple treatments, and sometimes there are multiple control conditions. Because random assignment is used, the researchers can make a strong argument that the two or more groups, that they are comparing were similar to start with. And this allows them to attribute changes in the outcome variable to the manipulation that they introduced through their conditions. You may also see that true experiments may be referred to in different ways. They may be called intervention trials or randomized control trials. And these are often used when the researchers aim to statistically compare groups in terms of the outcome variables. So here we see an abstract from a true experimental design that was used in a 2013 study conducted in Canada. So as we read just the first sentence of this abstract, we can see, oh, this report describes a randomized control trial. It is an intervention study, and they were looking at the effectiveness of a web-based literacy system. This means that they were looking for an effect on certain aspects of reading fluency, such as sound knowledge, phoneme segmentation fluency, and others. In this description of the report, you can very clearly identify both the treatment and the outcome variables of interest. This abstract also presents an example where a pre-test, post-test design was used. This suggests that what the researchers were interested in was a change in some sort of performance score from the beginning, prior to treatment, till the end at post-test. Quasi-experimental designs also use group comparison, but they cannot make as strong of a claim that the treatment variable definitely caused the measured effect in the outcome. And this is because, for whatever reason, it was necessary to use intact groups. So as an example, they might have chosen to compare two classes, one that took place in the morning and one that took place in the afternoon. Now, in a university setting, it is possible that there might be something about students who choose morning classes that may cause them to perform differently than students who choose only afternoon classes. So depending on what the outcome was or what the treatment was, there's a possible confound that can come from using pre-existing groups. So you can identify quasi-experimental studies usually by looking at how the groups were formed. Sometimes these studies may simply be called experimental explorations. However, if you read carefully, you can usually tell pretty quickly by looking at how the participants were grouped whether or not it was really a quasi-experimental approach. So here's an example from the literature of a quasi-experiment. So in this study, they looked at the effects of a web-based math tutoring software on students' year-end test scores. And if you read this description, you'll see that what they did was compare students in a treatment school that used the assessment software versus control schools or a comparison school. Now, of course, they could not assign participants to the schools that they attend. So here is an example where they were using pre-existing groups. Single subject research designs are used relatively less often, but you may see them especially frequently when looking at studies of interventions in special populations. So in this kind of design, one or more individuals are repeatedly monitored in terms of the outcome variable to see whether or not adding the treatment and taking it away affects how they score. This allows one individual to act as their own control because the researcher collects a baseline measurement for that individual, gives them the treatment, and takes it away, and looks at how the individual is impacted by that manipulation. It's usually fairly simple to identify a single subject design. In some cases, the researchers may have worked with a number of individuals, 5 individuals, for example, but they used multiple measurements for each of those individuals, and they're only really comparing that individual's behavior with their own baseline. These are fairly rigorous designs, and they can be used to make strong claims about treatment effects. Here's an example of a single subject design. In this study, a number of students were given a tape recorder and audiobooks to take home, and what they wanted to know was, would this at-home audio reading program encourage these first grade readers to be more motivated to read and adopt reading more frequently on their own time? And you'll see here that they describe using a single subject reversal design, an ABA design. And this means that they took multiple baseline measurements for each individual who participated. So they compared how the student fared at baseline with how they fared during the intervention, and they also looked at what happened after the intervention. And you can see that they were working with second language learners. And as I said before, a single subject design is often used to look at the impact of an intervention with a special group. Where it may not even be feasible to find a large number of individuals who meet a certain description at a given site. Now on to correlational designs. These are descriptive quantitative designs, and they are intended to measure relationships. They usually study a single group of individuals, and they can be used to conclude that 2 variables are related to each other, but they cannot be used to make strong claims about causality. You may have heard the sort of truism, correlation is not causation, and I hope that you take that phrase to heart. It's important to note that although on the slide we're discussing whether or not 2 variables are related to each other, it is possible to look at correlations across a larger number as well. So you will often be able to identify correlational research just by looking for that word. You may also see researchers discussing the predictive properties of variables. And you will also note that they will use statistical techniques to check for relationships. So here is an example of a correlational design. And as we read this abstract, we can notice a few things. First, they wanted to examine performance as a function of grade and course satisfaction, and in particular, self-efficacy for online technologies. So here, when they say they want to examine performance as a function of something else, they're asking, is there a relationship between, in this case, course satisfaction and performance, or self-regulated learning strategies and performance, and of course, self-efficacy and performance. We can see that they have a fairly large sample. There are 800 students in their sample, and these individuals filled out what seems to be a number of questionnaires, and the researchers looked at relationships between those scales and their outcomes of interest, and they found a significant positive correlation. So finally, we have survey research, and survey research is intended to describe trends for very large groups of people. They're usually aiming to describe trends that do generalize to the entire population, and as such, they very carefully try to select a sample of people that is representative of the population of interest. You will often see these called descriptive studies or population level studies. And a quick note here about terminology: although you may see questionnaires used for gathering data in other designs referred to as surveys, that does not mean that the research design employed was necessarily a survey research design. In order to identify the research design, you need to look more closely at the research problem. Did they aim to describe trends of a very large group or not? And also, typically in a survey research design, more rigorous sampling techniques are used. For example, simple random sampling, stratified random sampling, and so forth. Here's an example of a survey design. And in this study, which was conducted by the National Center for Education Statistics in the USA, they wanted to gather national data on how teachers in public elementary and secondary schools were using technology in 2009. So here you can see that they had a very descriptive purpose. They just wanted to know what's going on nationally in terms of the use of information technology in schools and classrooms. And you can see that they describe a great deal of information about the teachers and what was available to them. If you actually get the chance to pick up a report like this one, you'll find that these kinds of huge national surveys can really provide valuable context for a lot of the work and research that you will be reading and perhaps conducting yourself in the future. So that concludes this discussion of quantitative research designs, and I hope this video was useful to you.